Okay, so I'm recording this in the car, which I'm told I shouldn't do because of health and safety. And I normally record just my regular podcast in the car, and I normally do the Sci-Fi podcast. I don't do it while I'm driving. I do it over the weekend, and I have prepared notes, and I've visited with a shaman who has blessed the podcast, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas the one I do in the car, the Josh cast, is just me rattling off anything. But I had the impulse today to do a Sci-Fi podcast. I should probably just combine them into the same podcast. There's probably not much difference between me talking about science fiction for an hour and me talking about being neurotic and lonely for an hour. Really, the overlap there is to the point that it's the same podcast. But at any rate, I'm going to go ahead and file this one under the Sci-Fi podcast. I want to talk about Thundercats. Now, I debated whether or not Thundercats is science fiction because there's magic involved, and I have this very strong... I'm irritated that science fiction and fantasy just seem to be as a genre merging, and very often, even if I feel like on Netflix, it's one category: science fiction and fantasy. And I don't know, that bothers me because, for lack of a better term, pure science fiction should be based on science, hence the name science fiction. And the fact that it's being lumped together with fantasy, the fact that the Sci-Fi Channel is, half the shows on it are really no longer science fiction. Half of them are fantasy. And the fact that there's this merging between the two bothers me. And yet, here I am about to talk about Thundercats, which is a 1980s cartoon, and the people who made this show, they also made Silverhawks. These people are not interested in science. They are not remotely interested in science, because there was a scene in Silverhawks where a guy is driving, keyword, driving in space, driving. I think he had a steering wheel. Driving in space, and he falls over the edge of his car and falls down in space, deep space, not even near a planet. So, and I don't think he was wearing a space suit. And as I recall, he was an animal person of some kind, like a giant pig or something. So, and even in Thundercats, there's a character in Thundercats who was like a space police officer, and she flew through space on basically a motorcycle. Again, not wearing any protective breathing apparatus of any kind. She can just survive in zero, without an atmosphere. Driving in a space motorcycle, a hover cycle that can fly through space, apparently at the speed of light. So the science fiction elements are a little wonky here. This is more of a fantasy. But it's dear to my heart, and I grew up with it, so I got to talk about it. The other fascinating thing that I find about Thundercats is that it was on for, I think, 2 or 3 years, and so there's a slim range of people who know what it is. And there's 2 reactions to Thundercats. What is that? Or, I get it, man. I totally get it. And there's nothing in the middle. I'm not... See, the trouble with doing this while I'm driving is that now I get to comment on what people are doing on the road. And this person is trying to make a left turn, and there's no street to turn on. So, she's trying to make a U-turn. One of those people. I'm going to make a U-turn no matter what. That has nothing to do with Thundercats. Actually, if the Thundercats were witnessing, they would have helped her make the U-turn, because the Thundercats are big into helping people. All right, Thundercats. What if you're someone who's never seen or heard of Thundercats before, what is Thundercats? Let's dig. Basically, there's this planet. It's called Thundera. No surprise there. And on this planet, you have the Thundercats, and they are cat people. They are humanoids, but they are also cat-like. I don't know how that happened. They never really say how that happened. They just exist. I would suggest that at some point there were humans, and then there were cats, and things happened. But this is a family-friendly cartoon, and that cannot be explored. Or perhaps, if you want to go more of the science fiction route, there were a bunch of humans who took some cat DNA and combined it with human DNA and kind of Dr. Moreau'd the situation and created these cat people. Or it's just a situation where it's on another planet and evolution took a slightly different turn to where you have someone who's a half man, half tiger, and he's good with whips. I don't know what to tell you. So they're these people, these cat people. They're on this planet. The planet at the first episode is blowing up. Problem with the planet. Problem with the core. Something to do with blowing up. So they escape. They fly away on giant ships. And there's royalty. There's like the leaders of the Thundercats. And the main character, Lion-O, that's his name, Lion-O, presumably of the lion person lineage. And the question I have too, by the way, is I'm assuming Lion-O is not the only lion cat, and yet the name seems pretty generic, Lion-O. I mean, aren't there other why is he called Lion-O? I mean, this is beyond like the John Smith of Thundercats. This is like calling someone Humano. I'm human. I am human. My name, human. I'm a human. All right, good. Listen, it's an all-encompassing name. So Lion-O is like supposed to be the next leader of the Thundercats. So we're dealing here, by the way, with a monarchy, essentially. Very King Arthur feeling. And it's kind of all agreed upon that he's going to be the next ruler of the Thundercats, but he's a kid. And he is given, or they have, what is called the Sword of Omens. And it is a sword that when you say Thundercats ho, the sword gets bigger. It starts out as a dagger, but it actually extends. It gets bigger and becomes a sword. And then in the hilt, it has this, what's called the Eye of Thundera. And it looks like a cat eye when it's in sleep mode. But then when it's activated, the cat eye turns into the symbol of the Thundercats, which is a cat roaring. And then it can project the symbol of the Thundercats, kind of like the bat signal, in the air, so that the other Thundercats see it and say, "Uh-oh, Lion-O's in trouble. We better come to help." And then they come to help. And so that's what. And the sword can also give the person who's looking at it sight beyond sight. So if there's trouble, the sword says, "Hey, there's trouble." And he looks into the sword. He looks kind of through the hilt, and sees the trouble. Although the one thing I've noticed about the Sword of Omens is that if it was really an omen, shouldn't it show the trouble before it's happening? I think in the cartoon it always shows the trouble as it's happening. So that's really not the Sword of Omens. It's more of the Sword of current events. It's the Sword of Twitter, really. And so he's got the Sword of Omens, okay? And there's also Tigra. Thing I noticed about Tigra, it's a he. All the other male Thundercats have O at the end of their name. Lion-O, Panthro. But Tigra has an A at the end of his name. It's not Tigro. It's Tigra. Yet he is a male Thundercat. They could have gone somewhere with that. That could have been a comment on something. But of course it wasn't, because it was the 80s. And the 80s, I don't know, the 80s are this weird time where, we're kind of better on human rights, but kind of not. Then again, you could describe that really at any period. So you got Tigra, etc. And you got Cheetara, the one female Thundercat, who is, of course, because she's a cheetah, she's really, really fast. And then you've got Wily Kit and Wily Cat, the Thunder Kids. And they were really good at, I think, surfing on hoverboards and throwing things. That was their ability, and getting into trouble. So they got that unlocked. Then Panthro, who was kind of the engineer Thundercat. And what I liked about Panthro is that he wore suspenders with spikes on them, and the spikes could extend and either hurt people or be used for mountain climbing. That's the greatest. Now those are suspenders. I gotta say, those are some pretty awesome. I've never seen that. I would wear those suspenders. I would wear those suspenders because I remember there was an episode where he fell over the edge of a cliff, and the spikes at the end of the suspenders shot out and broke his fall. I mean, that's some really great equipment that both save your life and hold up your pants. You don't find that kind of craftsmanship in our clothing, certainly. It's either or. Either you get something that saves your life, or you get something that holds up your pants. This was an all-in-one. Amazing. So you got Panthro. All right. So they're all in their ship. They're evading the exploding planet. Oh, and there's also the guy named Jaga, who looks like Obi-Wan Kenobi, sounds like Obi-Wan Kenobi, appears later on in the show as a ghost like Jaga is Obi-Wan Kenobi. As close as they could get to Obi-Wan Kenobi without violating copyright. And he's the elder, the one who knows everything. So as they're escaping, I think they get separated from the other ships because they're attacked by mutants. Uh-oh, mutants. Mutants are always the bad guys. Always the bad guys. Mutants, always the bad guys. What is a mutant? Isn't it just another step in evolution? And the mutants, I think there's three different kinds of mutants. There's the lizard mutants and the monkey mutants, who are called the Monkeans. And then I think there's a buzzard or a vulture mutant. The mutants, they're never cute. They're never cute animals. And I think the mutants, I believe, are after the Sword of Omens, and I think they're from the planet Plundar, which, when you come from the planet Plundar, it's pretty clear what your motivation is. So they attack. They board the ship. Young Lion-O, I think, grabs the sword, and the sword starts to glow, and they go, oh, wait a minute, no, the sword's glowing. Let's get out of here. So they leave, and the ship is damaged, and the ship is off course, and I think they find a planet that is suitable for life, but it's going to take 80 years to get there, so they have to go into cryo sleep. But Jaga, the wise, says, don't worry, I'll drive the ship. I'm going to die halfway through, but then I'll come back as a ghost and be there to give you advice at critical moments. That's my role, clearly. And before, what I remember is that in the very first episode, by the way, all the Thundercats were naked, including Cheetara. Yes, totally naked, totally naked. And that seemed to be fine with everybody. It's fine with me. But at one point, when Jaga is saying, okay, we found this planet, you're going to be landing on the planet. Hey, by the way, you're going to need clothes to protect you. And the clothes that he gives them are essentially bathing suits. These are the tightest fitting. I mean, like Panthro, when I say it's suspenders holding up underwear. That's what we're dealing with here. How is this providing protection? From what? The Motion Picture Association of America giving it an R rating? What protection are you talking about? Where do you think you're going to land, Boca? And so they have these clothes now and these weapons. And each one has a cool weapon. So, Lion-O's going to get the Sword of Omens, and Tigra has this whip that can, if he whips it around himself, it turns invisible, which is really cool, but also really kind of not convenient. And then Chitara has a staff, and Wily Kit and Wily Cat, I think they throw marbles that explode. If I were a Wily Kit or Wily Cat, I'd be like, really? Can I get a mace? Can I get something that's a little more Zoftic than what you're giving me? Marbles? You're giving me grenades that explode pink? What? Great. Perfect. Actually, and of all the Thundercats, they were the ones who wore the most, too. So they were wearing, I don't know what they were wearing, like togas or something. No, I think they were wearing shorts and almost like wife beaters is what they were wearing. They're a ragtag group, the more I think about it. So that's what they all have. And so the ship flies for 50 years. Jaga dies mid-route, disappears, just like Obi-Wan Kenobi. Jaga, by the way, is wearing underwear and a cape. And that, now that I think about it, that's the greatest costume ever. Just underwear and a cape. Yep. Why? Because I can. He dies, disappears. They crash. They crash on Third Earth, which I believe is Earth of the future. It's called Third Earth. I don't know what happened to the first and the second Earth. They crash. And it's a hostile planet, and the big baddie is an Egyptian mummy named Mum-Ra, who's pissed off that they crashed. I'm not entirely sure why. They crashed in his territory, and I don't know what he's doing. I think he's sleeping the whole time. This just could be the ultimate Dennis the Menace, Mr. Wilson, hey, get off of my lawn situation. As villains go, Mum-Ra's a pretty awesome villain. They were not afraid to make this guy look creepy. I mean, this is a decrepit mummy, but he can turn in the ancient spirits of evil would give him the power to become suddenly this ripped. His body is ripped. His face still looks half melted and skeletal. And he's still got some of the mummy wrappings on him as he turns into Mum-Ra, the ever-living, as he turns into his ripped version. Okay, so the Thundercats have crash-landed on Third Earth. Now, Lion-O, something happened with his cryotube, so he aged more than he should have. So he went into the cryotube 13, and he came out with the body of a 25-year-old. But still, the mind of a 13-year-old, which is an interesting plot twist. It's very Shazam. A kind of a cool conflict, because now he's got to be the leader of the Thundercats, but he's still an idiot. Then again, now that I think about it, is he really that much different than most leaders today? Is he that much different than most men today? I think really, even there are 70-year-old men who are really still 13 when you really do the math. So maybe it's not that big a deal. The mutants follow, and they attack, and the Lion-O grabs the sword, and he does thunder, 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 Thundercats, ho! And it wakes all the other Thundercats up, and then they fight, and they beat back the mutants, and now we're on Third Earth. We got to survive. We got to figure this out. And then they proceed to build a bunch of toys. That's really because the whole point of the whole show is to sell toys. So they build the Thunder Tank. These guys, by the way, very good with branding. And the Thunder Tank looks like a tank, but with the head of a cat. So And I love that he built that out of spare parts. He built that out of spare parts. Now, it's one thing to cobble together a vehicle from the spare parts of another vehicle. But on top of that, to hand sculpt a face. I mean, this guy's a genius. This guy is an artistic slash engineering genius. That would be like if a bunch of people got shipwrecked, and the people were like a bunch of Americans got shipwrecked somewhere, and there's one engineer that was like, I can fashion a vehicle out of this ship, and the next day everyone wakes up and they look, and it's this tank with the head of George Washington. And he's like, no, this I'm a patriot. This is an American tank. You're like, how did you... Wait a minute, the front of the tank looks like the face of George... How did you do that? I just threw it together from some spare parts. Did we have a George Washington face on the ship? Just, a little whittling. That's pretty much all I did there. But I mean, it's made out of titanium. You have a titanium George Washington face. How did you do that? Now, I've arrived at my destination. I can go on about Thundercats. For God's sakes. I don't know if I should, though. So this may have to be a two-parter. Thundercats. There you have it. Watch it. Enjoy it.